It all started with an ordinary dinner on a Monday evening, the kind of dinner that should feel safe, but didn't. The meatloaf was dry, the peas were mushy, and the air at the table was thicker than the gravy congealing on my plate. My grandson Matthew, only 8, pushed his peas around his plate, too afraid to say he didn't like them. My son Jason kept his head down, chewing mechanically. And Samantha, my daughter-in-law, the queen of the house, now sat across from me, glaring at the stain on my sleeve, like it insulted her personally. I had spilled a bit of coffee earlier, my hands trembling more than usual that morning. Arthritis is not kind to old bones. But Samantha didn't see an old woman trying her best. She saw a burden. Suddenly she snapped her fork down so hard it clattered against her plate. Everyone froze. "He eats like a pig and does nothing," she said sharply, her eyes locked on Jason, but her words aimed straight at me. And I'm not her babysitter. Maybe she should take the hint and get out before I have to throw her out myself. Her words sliced through the heavy air and settled like a stone in my stomach. For a heartbeat, I thought Jason would defend me. He was my boy, my miracle baby I had nearly died birthing. But he didn't. He didn't even look at me. He kept chewing like her cruelty was normal, acceptable, maybe even deserved. Matthew's big eyes darted between the adults. He understood enough to stay silent, to shrink into his chair. Children always know when the grown-ups are playing cruel games. I sat there feeling my face burn, but my heart go cold. I wanted to remind Samantha who paid her rent when Jason lost his job. I wanted to say how I held Jason's father's hand through cancer while working 2 shifts to keep a roof over our heads. But I didn't say anything. Instead, I picked up my fork and calmly finished my meal. Bite by bite, I swallowed my dignity with overcooked peas. When dinner ended, I stood my knees screaming, my back aching. I cleared every plate, scraped every leftover into the trash, and washed each dish by hand. The running water masked the sound of laughter drifting from the living room. Samantha and Jason laughed at something on TV. Maybe at me, maybe not. It didn't matter anymore. I dried my hands, wiped down the counter, and turned off the kitchen light. Then I shuffled to my so-called guest room, a glorified storage closet with peeling paint and a cot so lumpy I could feel every spring. There was no closet, no dresser, just my suitcase in the corner and a single high window I couldn't reach. I lay there fully clothed, staring at the ceiling fan. It clicked with each slow rotation, like an old clock, reminding me how time steals everything: youth, strength, and finally respect. In that lonely room, memories flooded me. Jason as a boy, sick with the flu, my hands cooling his forehead all night. His first day of school. The mortgage papers my late husband and I signed when we had nothing but hope and each other. I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness. I am not just someone who eats and does nothing, but my words came back to me empty. No one heard them. No one cared. Somewhere in that silence, I felt a seed of resolve sprout deep inside my tired bones. I didn't know it yet, but that tiny seed would soon grow into something powerful enough to change everything. For now, I pulled my thin blanket tighter around my shoulders and listened to the laughter I had paid for a roof-warmth dinner, yet none of it belonged to me anymore. That night, sleep refused to come, even though my bones begged for rest. I lay stiff on the thin mattress, the ceiling fan above, ticking out my regrets. Outside the door, I heard Samantha's voice, low but sharp as broken glass. Jason murmured something in response, too soft to catch, but I knew his tone. That tone meant, just let it be. She'll be gone soon enough. I pulled the scratchy blanket to my chin. Somewhere down the hall, my grandson Matthew let out a small whimper in his sleep. I closed my eyes and remembered when Jason was that age, how I would run my fingers through his hair to calm his nightmares. Now my touch was unwelcome, my presence an inconvenience. I couldn't stop the memories from rising up like ghosts. Jason at 5 coughing so hard in winter, I feared I'd lose him. Me working days at the dry cleaners nights, scrubbing floors at the school cafeteria, pinching pennies to buy him medicine. And later my husband's last days. His weak hand, clutching mine, whispering, "Promise me, Lizzie, you'll never let our boy forget who you are." But promises made on deathbeds drift away like smoke when people grow greedy for comfort. Jason didn't remember who I was, or worse, he chose to forget. I turned on my side, the bed springs squealing under my hips. My eyes caught the little suitcase by the wall, a battered leather thing that had traveled through my entire life. Hospital stays, funerals, birthdays, every move, when rent was overdue. I had nowhere else to go, or so I told myself. But as the fan droned above, something stubborn awoke inside me. An ember I thought my tired heart had snuffed out. Maybe I didn't have to stay where I wasn't wanted. Maybe I wasn't as helpless as they thought. I sat up slowly, my back protesting. I reached for my old rosary tucked beneath the pillow. The beads felt cool against my palms. I whispered prayers I hadn't spoken in years, not for them but for me. God, remind me I am more than this. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. Just a quiet vow that I would not let my story end in a storage room waiting to be thrown out like yesterday's news. In the living room, the TV blared a sitcom laugh track. Samantha cackled louder than the fake audience. I could almost picture her curled against Jason on the sofa I bought with my first Christmas bonus 25 years ago. What a fool I was, thinking gifts could buy love. I pressed the rosary to my lips and imagined what my late husband would say if he could see me now. "Lizzie, you were never weak. You raised a son and buried a husband with your own hands. If they don't remember that, make them." I felt a tear slip down my temple, vanishing into my hair. I didn't wipe it away. Some tears deserve to stay. Slowly I lay back down, the rosary clutched in my fist. I still didn't know what tomorrow would look like, but for the first time in years, I believed tomorrow might be mine to shape, not theirs to control. 2 days passed after that sleepless night. I woke up before dawn each morning as I always did. I made coffee the way Jason liked, strong, 2 sugars, a splash of cream. I packed Matthew's lunchbox, folding the napkin into a little triangle the way he giggled about. I even sewed a button back onto Jason's shirt, the one Samantha never bothered to fix. I did all this without a word of complaint, moving quietly through their house like a ghost that cooked and cleaned and asked for nothing in return. Samantha barely looked at me. Jason avoided my eyes. Matthew gave me a shy hug before leaving for school, whispering, "Love you, Grandma." I tucked that whisper deep inside my chest, a tiny treasure no one could take. On the 3rd morning, Samantha announced they were leaving for a much-needed couples weekend. She stood by the door, suitcase in hand, sunglasses perched on her head, even though it was raining outside. Jason mumbled something about back Monday. They didn't invite me, of course. Not even a pretend excuse. Just left me with a fridge full of leftovers and an empty house that echoed my loneliness. When their car pulled out of the driveway, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stood by the window and watched the raindrops slide down the glass. For the first time in years, the house was silent, truly silent. No Samantha's snide remarks. No Jason's indifferent silence. Just the hum of the refrigerator and my own heartbeat. I made myself a cup of tea, weak just the way my doctor warned me was better for my blood pressure. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around the warm mug, staring at the empty chair where my husband used to sit. "Arthur," I whispered, "I think it's time." I didn't pack much. Just the essentials. My old leather suitcase, the rosary, a stack of documents I'd kept hidden for years, and my worn notebook filled with notes only I understood. I wiped the kitchen counter one last time. I washed the mug and set it upside down on the drying rack. I folded the dish towel neatly and placed the house key on top of it, a quiet statement that said, I was here. I mattered. And now I choose to go. No dramatic goodbye notes. No slamming doors. Just the soft click of the front door closing behind me. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air smelled clean, like a promise. I held my suitcase in one hand and my handbag in the other. My knees protested each step, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. At the bus stop down the street, I waited beside teenagers scrolling on their phones and a young mother fussing with her baby's blanket. No one noticed the old woman with the battered suitcase. That suited me fine. When the bus came, I climbed the steps, slowly dropping my coins into the fare box with trembling fingers. The driver gave me a polite nod. I smiled back. For the first time in too long, I realized I was going somewhere of my own choosing. As the bus pulled away, I looked back at the house that once held my dreams and my heartbreak in equal measure. I felt no anger, just a quiet farewell to the woman I used to be within those walls. I didn't know exactly what waited at the end of that bus ride, only that it would be different. And that difference was enough. For the first time, I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving in peace. The bus ride felt longer than I remembered. Or maybe my bones were just older now, creaking with every bump and turn down roads I once knew by heart. I clutched my handbag, closed my fingers, brushing against the corner of the old file folder I had carried for decades, but rarely opened. My late husband's handwriting still lived inside those pages, a quiet reminder of the man who had promised I would never be left with nothing. When the bus pulled into town, I stepped off carefully, my knees protesting every step. The street looked exactly the same cracked sidewalk, the same faded green awning above Mr. Chen's bakery. I used to buy Jason warm bread here after school. He'd tear into it with laughter crumbs all over his school uniform. I walked slowly to an old brick building with brass letters by the door. James Callahan, attorney at law. My husband's best friend. The man who handled our will, our deed. All the paperwork I never fully understood, but always trusted. Inside the office smelled of leather old books and faintly of pipe smoke. Nothing had changed. I felt 20 years melt away as I stood in the same spot I once held Arthur's trembling hand, signing documents neither of us wanted to face, but knew we had to. James looked up from his cluttered desk, eyes widening in surprise. He stood slowly, older now like me, and offered a hand I hadn't shaken in a decade. Lizzie. Good Lord. Sit. You want tea? I smiled. 2 sugars, no milk? You remember? Of course I do. He shuffled to a side table and busied himself with an old kettle. As the water boiled, I sat across from him, the file folder heavy in my lap. My fingers traced the edges, feeling both foolish and hopeful. I need to ask you something, James. Anything. Do you remember the house deed, the one Arthur signed before? I hesitated. Saying before he died still hurt more than I liked to admit. James didn't flinch. He reached for a key, unlocked a wooden drawer, and pulled out a thick manila envelope, bound with a faded string. I never threw it away. You were always on that title, Lizzie. Fully, Arthur insisted. He slid the envelope to me. I opened it carefully, half expecting dust to rise like old secrets. But instead there was my name, in black ink, clear, and final. Elizabeth Harris, sole owner. I exhaled so deeply my chest ached. Decades of being called a burden, a mouth to feed, vanished in the quiet truth of a signature my husband left behind. Why didn't I remember this? I whispered. Because life made you forget Lizzie, but Arthur made sure you wouldn't lose everything. I looked at James, at his lined face, gentle eyes. In that moment, I felt a strength I hadn't tasted in years. I want to sell it. His eyebrows lifted, but he didn't argue. All right. Quietly. quietly. No warning. No calls. They'll find out when the papers are signed. James nodded. Then we do it your way. I felt the old fear crawl up my spine, but I held the envelope tighter. This wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming what was mine, what Arthur gave me, so I would never feel small in my own home. Before I left, James poured the tea, handed me the chipped cup, and said softly, "You've always been stronger than you think." I sipped, letting the warmth settle deep inside. For the first time in so long, I felt like the woman my husband loved, not the invisible ghost Samantha tried to erase. The envelope with my name on the deed weighed heavier than my suitcase ever did. I carried it back to the small rented room at the care home on the edge of town. A simple place, no fancy curtains or scented candles, but clean and quiet. For now, that was enough. I spread the papers out on my narrow bed. My old rosary lay beside them like a witness. I read every line, slowly tracing Arthur's signature, with my finger feeling each stroke of ink, like a promise he whispered across the years. They thought I had nothing. They thought I would just sit in that cramped guest room forever, washing their dishes until my back broke for good. They were wrong. The next morning, James called to confirm he had found a discreet buyer, a retired couple wanting to move closer to town. Cash offer. No fuss, no haggling. Perfect. Once escrow closes, they'll get the letter to vacate, James said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the old friendship in it, the same gentle loyalty Arthur once trusted with his life. Thank you, James. I said, my voice firm. Don't call Jason. Don't warn Samantha. I want no fights, just peace. You have my word. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed and let out a shaky breath. I half expected to feel guilt, but guilt never came. Instead, a strange calm settled in my chest. I hadn't stolen from them. I hadn't punished them out of spite. I had simply remembered who I was, the woman who bought that first family dinner table with coupons and tips from scrubbing floors. The woman who stayed up 3 nights sewing Jason's graduation gown when he spilled paint on it. The woman who loaned Samantha the money for her fancy dental work, which she never paid back. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. I made tea just for myself. I poured it into the chipped mug. The care home provided no fine china here, and I sipped it slowly, savoring the taste of something I hadn't felt in years' freedom. That evening, I took out my old notebook from my bag. It was soft from decades of pages turned by my fingers alone. Inside were lists no one ever saw: Jason's tuition when he dropped out, the car loan I co-signed, the water heater I paid to replace, groceries during the pandemic when Jason and Samantha both lost their jobs but kept their pride, more than $120,000 in silent love. I turned to a blank page and wrote one simple line: I am not a burden. I am the reason they ate, slept, and laughed under that roof. As I closed the notebook, I felt my back straighten a little. I wasn't just an old woman with shaking hands and stiff knees. I was a mother who remembered her own worth. Tomorrow the sale would begin. They would wake up to a letter taped to the front door, telling them to leave the house they thought was theirs. And I would use that money to build something better than revenge. I didn't know what exactly yet, but I knew it would have opened doors for women like me, women they called useless, but who were the foundation all along. As I drifted to sleep, I whispered into the quiet room, Arthur, I kept my promise. I remembered who I am. 3 days after I signed the papers, the letter arrived at the house I once called mine. It was delivered by hand, no warnings, no soft explanations, just cold legal truth printed on white paper. Jason found it first. He always checked the mail late after Samantha was done scrolling through online shopping ads. I imagine he tore the envelope open, half expecting another bill he'd ignore, until I covered it. But this time, it wasn't a bill. It was an eviction notice signed stamped and final. I wasn't there to see his face, but I knew it by heart. The disbelief, the flush of embarrassment, the clumsy excuses forming in his mouth before the shame swallowed them whole. Samantha, of course, wouldn't take it quietly. She probably shrieked through something across the kitchen, maybe called me names she'd only dared to mumble before. Let her scream. The house never belonged to her spite. At the care home, my phone buzzed until it went silent. Jason called 8 times. Samantha sent messages, long paragraphs of rage peppered with fake apologies. How could you do this? Where will we go after all we did for you? All they did for me. I chuckled, a sound that startled even myself. I pressed ignore. Again and again. No words this time. I had spent a lifetime filling silence with forgiveness. Now I let silence speak for me. In the cafeteria, Helen, the woman next door, whose children left her here like an unwanted dog, asked me why I was smiling into my cup of weak tea. I remembered I owned more than they ever thought, I said softly. She didn't understand fully, but she nodded. She too knew what it was to be invisible until you stopped apologizing for breathing. By Sunday evening, Jason's messages softened. He started with, "Mom, please pick up." Then, "We have nowhere to go. The kids are scared. Samantha's crying every night." He didn't mention love. He didn't say he was sorry for every quiet dinner where he let my dignity rot on the table. I didn't answer. My room was quiet except for the steady tick of a clock and the faint smell of lavender from my neighbor's diffuser. I made my bed as neatly as ever, folded my clothes into the single drawer, and sat by the window watching dusk turn into evening. I felt lighter. Not from cruelty, but from freedom. They would have to move. They would find a small apartment, maybe learn to live without taking so much for granted. Samantha would rage. Jason would sulk, but Matthew, my sweet boy, would adapt. Children do. Maybe someday he'll knock on my door, older, kinder, with questions about who I really was and why I left. And maybe I'll tell him everything. Or maybe I'll just hold him and say, "You were never the problem." That night, as the sun slipped behind the horizon, I whispered into the dark. They thought I was weak. They forgot I raised a family out of thin air. Let them remember now. A week after the house sold, the money arrived in my account, more than enough to cover a simple life for the rest of my days. But I didn't want just a simple life. I wanted purpose. For 3 nights, I lay awake on my narrow bed at the care home, staring at the ceiling, asking Arthur's ghost what to do next. His answer wasn't a voice, but a memory hymn saying, "You were always the heart of our family, Lizzie. When you stop giving, the walls fall silent." So I decided not to stop giving, but this time I'd give to the ones who truly needed it. Not to the ungrateful, not to those who forgot my hands built their comfort. The next morning, I asked Helen, the gentle woman who shared my hallway, to come for tea in my room. I poured her a cup and told her my idea: a real home, not a storage closet with nurses checking charts. A place for women like us who once gave everything and were paid back with silence and pity. Helen's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. "Do you really think old birds like us can have that?" I smiled, feeling 20 years younger. "Yes, Helen, because I'll build it myself." I spent the next week touring old houses for sale. Some were too fancy, some too rotten, but one small cottage on the edge of town caught my breath the moment I stepped inside. The porch creaked, the paint peeled, but the garden bloomed wild and brave like me. The owner, a retired nurse, had lived there alone for decades and was happy to see it go to someone who promised to fill it with laughter instead of gossip. I signed the papers the same afternoon. Paid in full, no haggling. I renamed it before I even unpacked my suitcase, Haven House. No one here would prove their worth to stay. We were worthy simply because we breathed. On the first morning, I brought Helen over to see it. We walked through the squeaky hallways together. The bedrooms were tiny but bright. The kitchen smelled of old wood and sunbeams. Helen laughed through her tears, touching the cracked windows like they were made of gold. "Lizzie, it's more than a house." I squeezed her hand. "It's our revenge, darling. Kindness is always the sweetest kind." That night, I sat on the new porch, a cup of weak tea warming my palms. In the garden, Helen planted fresh rosemary by the fence. Next month, we'd welcome 2 more women: Beatrice, a retired schoolteacher whose children left her behind, and Marion, a florist who outlived her whole family. We would share soup and secrets, mend each other's worn cardigans, argue about silly things like TV shows, and whether to put raisins in bread pudding. We would live, not just wait to die quietly behind closed doors. As the stars came out above Haven House, I whispered to the dark, "This is my home now." Not because someone lets me stay, but because I built it with what they thought was their victory. By the end of the month, Haven House had 4 women and more laughter than it had heard in decades. Beatrice was the first to arrive after Helen. She came with only 1 suitcase and a stack of well-worn crossword books. A retired school teacher, she corrected our grammar with a wink and always insisted on brewing the morning coffee herself. Strong enough to wake the dead, she'd joke. Marion came next. She used to own a flower shop, and though arthritis bent her fingers now, she still arranged fresh blooms in jam jars around the house. The living room smelled like roses and lavender, even on days we forgot to sweep the porch. In the beginning, we stumbled over each other's habits. Helen liked her tea with sugar. Beatrice refused to share her secret cookie stash. Marion scolded anyone who stepped on her garden beds, and I fussed over everyone like an old hen, reminding them to drink water and take their medicine. But the house was alive. We laughed. We bickered about what show to watch on our little TV. We made soup too salty and bread pudding too sweet. And when one of us felt the old sadness creeping in, that whisper that says, "You are forgotten now," another would knock gently and say, "Nonsense. Sit with us." One rainy afternoon, I found Helen sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at the rain streaking down the window. Her fingers twisted the corner of her shawl, the way my mother used to when she was nervous. "Penny for your thoughts?" I asked. She sniffed, embarrassed. "Just thinking. My daughter hasn't called in 2 years. I wonder if she even remembers where I am." I sat beside her, took her cold hand in mine, and squeezed it gently. "Helen, look around. Does this feel like nowhere?" She glanced at the kettle humming on the stove, at Beatrice, humming a hymn in the living room, at Marion fussing over a cracked flower pot. And slowly she smiled. "No, it feels like home." "That's right," I said, kissing her knuckles. "They may have left us behind, but we didn't leave each other." That night, I lay in my warm bed, the wind rattling the old window beside me, and thought about the first night I lay awake in Jason's guest room, a ghost in my own family's house. Now I was no ghost. I was flesh and memory, and a heartbeat loud enough to fill every corner of Haven House. They thought my silence was weakness, but the walls here knew the truth. Sometimes silence is just the quiet patience of a woman planning her second life. Months passed in a peaceful rhythm at Haven House. We planted herbs by the fence, argued about whether to paint the shutters blue or white, and celebrated Beatrice's 75th birthday with a lopsided cake Marion decorated with rose petals. Then one soft spring afternoon, while I was pruning the wild roses by the porch, a car pulled up on the gravel path. I knew the sound before I even looked up. Jason's old sedan tires, bald from neglect paint, faded like the excuses he used to make. He stepped out slowly, holding his keys too tight, as if they were a shield. He looked older than I remembered, hair thinning. Shoulders slumped forward, not from age, but from regret. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking on that single word he hadn't used for so long with any warmth. I didn't rush down the steps. I kept pruning the roses. Some thorns are worth the sting. After a while, I sighed and set my shears on the porch railing. "Why are you here, Jason?" He shifted his wait eyes, darting to the porch, to the garden, to the little sign by the mailbox that read, "Haven House. Welcome inside. I didn't know you'd built all this. I thought we thought you just ran away to be alone." I laughed, but not unkindly. "I didn't run, son. I walked on knees that still remember scrubbing your bathroom floor at midnight when you were sick." He winced. I deserved that. Silence fell between us. The porch creaked under the warm breeze. Inside, Beatrice's radio played an old love song drifting through the open window. Jason's eyes glistened. "Mom, we lost everything after you sold the house." "Samantha left me, took the kids. I live in a tiny apartment now. No help, no warmth, nothing. I thought you'd hate me forever." I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel triumph either. Just an old, tired softness, the kind that never fully dies in a mother's heart. "I don't hate you, Jason, but I can't fix you anymore. You broke that chair when you refused to stand up for me at your own table." He lowered his eyes. "Can I help here? I could fix the fence, or mow the grass, or anything." I looked at him, really looked, and for a moment I saw the boy who once fell asleep in my lap after reading pirate stories. Then I saw the man who forgot what kind of woman raised him. "No, Jason, Haven House doesn't run on guilt. It runs on love freely given. Go fix your own life. Be a father Matthew can be proud of." His shoulders trembled. He nodded, shame and longing etched into every wrinkle that hadn't been there when I last stroked his hair. "Mom, I'm so sorry." I stepped closer, touched his cheek just once. "I know. Now go home, Jason. My home is full." As he walked away down the garden path, Beatrice peeked through the curtain, eyebrows raised. Marion pretended to prune a dead branch that didn't exist. I laughed softly, picking up my shears again. Some roots need pruning to let new blooms grow. After Jason left, the day settled back into the gentle rhythm I had planted with my own hands. At Haven House, we woke up early. Beatrice always shouted at Helen for putting too much sugar in the morning coffee. Marion fussed about the weeds sneaking into her roses. I scolded everyone for forgetting their vitamins. And in the evenings, when the wind turned cool and the sky bruised purple behind the hills, we gathered on the porch, 4 old women, and sometimes a neighbor or two who wandered by for gossip and a cup of weak tea. One evening, Matthew came too. He stood shyly by the garden gate, clutching a bouquet of slightly wilted daisies. He had grown taller. His voice cracked. When he called out Grandma, I opened the gate, and he ran to me like he used to, burying his face in my shoulder. I breathed in the smell of soap and sunshine in his hair and thought, some roots you never have to cut. Mom and Dad fight all the time now, he whispered. I like it here better. I smiled against his hair. You are always welcome here, Matthew. But remember, my boy, you are never the burden. Not you. He nodded, hugging me tighter. Later, he sat on the porch steps, listening to Beatrice's stories about students who once dared to cheat on spelling tests, while Marion handed him cookies she claimed were only for grown-ups. Under the soft hum of crickets, I sat back and let their voices wash over me, like a song I thought I'd forgotten. The ache in my knees didn't matter. The lines on my face didn't matter. I was exactly where I was meant to be. That night, after everyone went to bed, I pulled out my old notebook one last time. The last page was blank, except for one line I wrote in careful letters. They said I eat, but don't help. They forgot I fed them every day. Now I feed hope. I tucked the notebook away in a small wooden drawer in my room next to my rosary, and a photo of Arthur smiling on our wedding day. I stepped onto the porch alone, wrapped in my shawl against the breeze. Above me, the stars blinked as if they knew all my secrets and kept them safe. Inside, I heard Helen's soft snores, Marian humming to herself while washing tomorrow's vegetables, and Beatrice tapping her cane against the floor to find her slippers. Not forgotten, not invisible, not done yet. I sipped my tea and whispered into the night. I didn't take revenge. I planted mercy. I didn't close a door. I opened one wider. And that is enough. Tomorrow we'd repaint the shutters, maybe blue this time. We'd argue about pudding again, fuss about weeds, laugh about nothing. And I, the woman they once dismissed as just eating but doing nothing, would keep feeding laughter and love as long as breath lived in my chest. This was peace, and it would last.